G'day guys, and welcome to this business management lesson. In today's lesson, we're looking at key knowledge point 211. That is Unit 2, Area of Study 1, and the first key knowledge point for this area of study. Today specifically, we're looking at an overview of legal requirements for establishing a business. And helpfully, this key knowledge point gives us a list of the different legal requirements that you need to be knowledgeable about to demonstrate your familiarity with the content of this key knowledge point. Now, the first of the listed legal requirements is applying for an ABN. Now, an ABN is an Australian business number. These are easy to apply for. It's a free process, and getting one is very, very simple. If you Google how to get an ABN, the first 16 or 17 results will direct you towards the Australian Business Register on the Australian government's website, where you can legally and freely apply for an Australian business number. All this does is provides a unique number that you can use to conduct economic activity in Australia. This will mean that institutions like the Bureau of Statistics and other government departments like the Australian Tax Office will have a way of identifying your business unique from any other businesses that might share common characteristics. Let's say, for example, you want to open a fish and chips shop in a suburb that maybe already has 3 or 4 fish and chips shops, and you might just have the sign out the front, fish and chips. People just generally talk about your business as being Burundara Fish and Chips, or whatever suburb you could possibly be located in. Then it might be confusing when people are trying to refer to your business and the authorities are trying to identify which business they're talking about. If every business is required to have its own unique number, then there is a way for the government and for the authorities to identify and discern between each individual business. And so that's why in Australia it is a legal requirement for every business to have a unique ABN. And it is a legal requirement. In Australia, you're not allowed to undertake economic activity if you don't have an ABN. The next thing that is a legal requirement is if you are going to trade under any business name that is different than your own name, and that exception only applies if you're a sole traded business. So if you're a sole trader and you're trading under your own name, you don't need to register your business name. But if you're going to do something like call yourself Redkenneth on the internet, then you would need to register that business name if you intended to conduct commercial activities under that name. The place where you register a business name is with the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, or ASIC. And once again, registering a business name, like applying for an ABN, very easy to do. It can be done right through their website, and it is free to do also. The legal requirement there is if you are going to conduct economic activities under a name other than your own birth name or your own legal name, and you're not a sole trader, you have to register that name to prevent people from scamming customers by naming themselves things that are particularly close to competitors or naming themselves the exact same thing as competitors. The whole function of ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, is to ensure that businesses aren't conducting themselves unethically or illegally. And so one of the key principles of registering your business name is to ensure that every business is operating under terms or using a name that is distinctly different from similar competitors to avoid misleading customers. Now, this is included in this key knowledge point, and I had this problem with the last study design. I have this problem with this study design also. Perhaps your teachers will tell you about this problem too. Registering a domain name is listed in this key knowledge point of legal requirements. However, it is not a legal requirement to register a domain name. It is a legal requirement to pay for any domain names that you intend to use, particularly if those are the property of an aggregator. You have to purchase domain licensing from businesses that collect and sell domains, but your business doesn't have to have a website. The fact is most businesses do have a website, and if you're going to have a website, you need to pay for it. You need to register that online in accordance with all of the requirements there. But your business is under no legal obligation to have a website. So this is slightly misleading. However, it's in the study design, so let's understand it. A domain name is the name that appears at the root directory for any website. Common examples of domain names: australia.gov.au, google.com, youtube.com. And you might know that if you go to google.com and you do a search, you'll be taken to google.com / and a whole lot more stuff. That's the URL for each individual search. Those are page references, but the domain name is the root directory. So google.com or youtube.com, and then there might be a / and details if you click into a video, but the domain name is that root directory. And the idea behind registering a domain name is that you should register something very similar to your business name, or very easily identifiable by customers when they're looking for your business online. Certainly, things like google.com or australia.gov.au, they're going to be very easy to remember. It's very clear, if you're familiar with either of these use cases, what you can expect to find at those domains. Certainly, if you want to know more about choosing a domain name and the characteristics or the criteria to think through when choosing a domain name, there are lots of resources on the internet that will give you lots of very reliable and some questionable advice about how to choose an appropriate domain name. But once again, it's not a legal requirement that your business has a website. Now, trade practices legislation is something that you need to consider, particularly as a business manager in Australia. It just so happens that the interactions between businesses and customers is complex and needs to be managed in a way that respects the rights and responsibilities of both customers and businesses. And to make sure that nobody's getting ripped off, or at least that there are consequences if someone's going around ripping people off, the Australian government has established competition and consumer law, or the Australian Consumer Law as it's commonly known, which outlines the rights and roles and responsibilities of both businesses and consumers when operating within the Australian economy. Certainly, each state and territory then elaborates on that. In Victoria, the Australian Consumer Law is enacted through the Australian Consumer Law and Fair Trading Act 2012. Now, this is not legal studies. You don't need to remember that reference off the top of your head. However, it is just important for illustrating this point that the rules around refunds and returns, how much a customer can get away with being unhappy with their purchase and wanting their money back, it is published and outlined in legislation. Now, here are just some examples of some things that are covered in the Australian Consumer Law. The first is that businesses are not allowed to produce or market misleading or deceptive materials to do with their outputs. It's illegal under the Australian Consumer Law to sell a bottle of pills and say it will cure your incurable diseases or your chronic conditions. It's illegal to sell computer hardware that promises to improve the speed of your computer by 100% when it does nothing of the sort. It's just some LEDs on a stick. It's totally inappropriate to sell foods and promise that they will give you more energy or that they will give you a better night's sleep. That's why you often find contributes to or assists in the terminology when businesses are making those kinds of promises. And certainly, more than just making promises about what a product or service can do for a customer, every factor of the business, every factor of marketing must be true at the time of publication. So any advertised sales prices must be honoured. And when a product is promoted at a certain price, the business must ensure that they have a quantity of product to meet expected demand. So if you are a business, for example, and you publish a magazine and you send it out to customers' letterboxes, promoting by typo that you have a TV for sale for $10, and you've published 1,000 copies of that magazine, then when customers start showing up to buy this $10 TV, you are legally required to have enough stock on hand to meet what is determined as reasonably foreseeable demand. So if you publish 1,000 magazines, then you might expect that maybe a third of the customers that you gave those magazines to read the magazine before they put it in the recycling. So you're going to need about 300 TVs on demand, or else perhaps the ACCC, or the party that enforced the Australian Consumer Law, might come and knocking on your door to have a word about your conduct. Certainly, if your customers are signing contracts with your business for mobile phone accounts, or for bank accounts, or for any other service relationship, gym memberships, that sort of thing, there is provisions in the Australian consumer law that make it illegal to have unfair conditions in those contracts. So if your gym membership is especially difficult to get out of, if the gym is being weaselly, trying to make you keep paying month after month because they make it very difficult for you to get out of that contract, the ACCC might want to hear about that, because that would be a breach of the Australian consumer law. And certainly competition prizes must be legitimate. This is another interesting quirk of the Australian consumer law. If you run a competition and the ACCC gets wind that nobody ever won the prize, or that the prize was different than what was promoted, then that is illegal also. Now, I've been saying repeatedly for the last couple of minutes that it's the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission that enforce the Australian consumer law, and there's their logo right there. The ACCC are the big dogs of Australian consumer legislation. Certainly, businesses and customers have rights, responsibilities outlined in the Australian consumer law, and where there is a breach, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or the ACCC, will investigate those breaches, and they'll prosecute breaches and pursue sanctions in the event that businesses or potentially consumers are going out of their way to be particularly difficult in the case of consumer law. The penalties are varied, but generally speaking, it's going to cost an awful lot more for a business in penalties than if they had just complied with the requirements under the legislation in the first place. And certainly, if you have to pay huge fines, or if you're prohibited from operating in certain economic capacities, probably that's going to introduce more significant barriers to the achievement of business objectives than could possibly have been present if you just followed the law in the first place. Now, taxation is another one of the legal requirements outlined in this key knowledge point, but you might remember that we've already talked about this a little bit in Unit 1, so we'll just go over this very quickly. Every business is required to pay tax in Australia. The more a business earns, the more tax they've got to pay. If you're an unincorporated business, that's your sole traders and your partnerships, you pay tax at the personal tax rate. It's no different than if you're just earning your money from a job, or if you're earning your money by running your own business. If you're unincorporated, you're paying your tax at the personal tax rate. However, if you incorporate, if you become a company, a private limited company or a public limited company, you pay tax at the incorporated rate, or at the company rate, which is a rate of a flat 27.5% for businesses for every dollar they earn under 50 million, and 30% for every dollar they earn over $50 million of revenue a year, which you can already see, even though this picture is cut off a bit at the bottom, that if your business earns over $45,000 and you're paying at the personal tax rate, you're already paying at 32.5%. So if you can afford to incorporate and you earn over $45,000 a year, you're probably going to make savings on your tax expenditure if you can afford to incorporate your business. And finally, work health and safety regulations. Well, it should be understood that every business manager has a responsibility to protect the well-being of their employees while they're at work. That unfair or unnecessary risks should be avoided, and every precaution should be taken to prevent foreseeable damage from occurring to your employees, whether that's long-term damage from exposure to loud noises, or whether that's short-term events like accidents resulting in trauma. It is enforced, it's administered and enforced by WorkSafe Victoria, who apply all of the different bits of legislation that relate to occupational health and safety in Victoria. And WorkSafe regularly go about inspecting work sites with random inspections and prosecuting employers for breaches of occupational health and safety requirements. It's another requirement in Australia, certainly in Victoria, that every employer needs to pay for what's called WorkSafe insurance. That is, every employer who has employees, I should add. WorkSafe manages this insurance, and generally speaking, this large sum of money that WorkSafe collects from every employer having to pay for WorkSafe insurance, that fund is then used to pay for lost income from employees who do get injured in the line of work, pay for those employees' medical and rehabilitation costs, pay for any legal costs that stem from an investigation or a prosecution, and if employees are going to be paid a lump sum of compensation for their experiences, those lump sums are typically paid out of the volume of money that's been collected through payments for WorkSafe insurance. Now, in summary for this key knowledge point, there are legal responsibilities for business managers. We know that. And having a closer look at some of these legal responsibilities and related considerations is what this area of study is all about. The legal requirements that need to be adhered to when establishing a business is what this key knowledge point has looked at, and those include registering a business name, registering a website domain, but once again, it's a little bit questionable, trade practices legislation, business tax compliance, and WorkSafe insurance. The benefits of these legal requirements is they're going to create a level playing field, and every business will be just as accountable as their competitors, and every business will be held to a particular standard for the benefit of consumers and employees. Also, the real benefit for consumers and employees, and certainly competition, is this will prevent any business from getting away with exploitative practices. Exploitation of customers or of competition is strictly prohibited by these legislative requirements, and these legislative requirements largely equip the government or prosecutorial bodies to act and ensure that any dodgy goings-on are dealt with swiftly. That's all for today. See you next time.